Picture this. It's barely dawn in Phoenix, and I'm watching three guys in ski masks take crowbars to my life's work. Red paint is dripping down the sides of Abuela's kitchen like blood, mixing with the shattered glass from my service windows. The smell of spray paint cuts through the desert morning air, making my eyes water. But here's the thing that would have surprised those vandals if they'd stuck around. I wasn't panicking. I was standing there in my pajamas, watching $50,000 worth of equipment get destroyed, and I was actually smiling. Because what they didn't know was that their boss, Carol Fitzgerald from the HOA, had just handed me the evidence I needed to destroy her completely. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Miguel? Yeah, it's Danny. Remember what you told me about those cars? It's time. The guy on the other end chuckled. ¿Estás seguro, hermano? This is going to get messy. I looked at my grandmother's photo hanging crooked in the broken window, covered in red paint. Oh, I'm sure. Tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with a HOA that seemed to have it out for small businesses? I want to know if this kind of harassment happens everywhere, or if Phoenix just breeds especially creative bullies. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in a war with a woman who turned out to be running one of Arizona's biggest car theft operations. My name's Danny Ramirez, and 6 months ago I thought the American dream meant working 16-hour days to turn my grandmother's recipes into something that could pay the bills. Abuela came across the border in 1967 with nothing but the clothes on her back and her recipes sewn into the lining of her dress. She spent 40 years cooking for other people's families before she finally taught me everything she knew. When she passed 3 years ago, she left me two things: a faded notebook full of recipes written in Spanish and a burning need to make sure her legacy didn't die with her. I took every penny of my savings, bought a beat-up Airstream trailer, and spent 8 months converting it into a mobile kitchen. Bright orange and yellow paint job with flowers and traditional Mexican patterns. Abuela's picture right there on the side, smiling like she approved of the whole crazy plan. The funny thing about the food truck business is that it's all about relationships. You're not just selling tacos, you're becoming part of people's daily routine. Construction crews would line up at 7 in the morning for breakfast burritos. Office workers knew I'd be parked at Central and Indian School every Tuesday for lunch. Weekend soccer games meant families buying dinner for 8. I wasn't getting rich, but I was building something. Every dollar I made went 3 ways: keeping the truck running, sending money to my parents in El Paso, and saving for a brick-and-mortar restaurant. The dream was simple: authentic Mexican food made with love, just like Abuela taught me. My house in Sunset Hills came with the world's biggest driveway, perfect for parking the truck overnight. The previous owner had been a contractor who used it for his work trucks. The neighbors seemed cool with it at first. I'd even made extra food for block parties, handed out free samples to kids. For 5 beautiful months, life was perfect. Then Carol Fitzgerald knocked on my door. I should have known there was something off about her from the start. It was a Tuesday afternoon, brutally hot even for Phoenix, and she showed up wearing a full business suit. In August, in the desert. The smell of her expensive perfume couldn't mask the nervous sweat, and her smile looked like it came from a customer service training manual. Mr. Ramirez, I'm Carol Fitzgerald, secretary of the Sunset Hills HOA. We need to discuss your vehicle situation. She was holding a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse, and the way she said vehicle situation made it sound like I was parking a nuclear missile in my driveway. There seems to be some confusion about commercial versus residential use, she continued, not waiting for me to invite her in. Your neighbors have raised concerns about the noise, the smells, the constant traffic. That was interesting because I'd just gotten back from delivering lunch to Mrs. Patterson next door, who was recovering from hip surgery, and the Hendersons across the street had asked if I could cater their anniversary party next month. Which neighbors exactly? I asked. Her left eye twitched. That's not important. What matters is compliance with community standards. Here's what I learned later about Carol Fitzgerald. She'd moved to Sunset Hills 6 months before me, paid cash for a house worth $400,000, and somehow managed that on a BMW dealership salary. She drove a different luxury car every few weeks, always with temporary plates. She worked weird hours, sometimes gone for days at a time, always talking on her phone in hushed voices. But what really should have tipped me off was how she kept looking at my truck like it was personally offensive to her existence. The CC&Rs are very clear, she said, pulling out a document. No commercial vehicles, no business operations, no activities that disturb the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. I glanced through the papers. Standard HOA stuff, mostly. But here's a knowledge nugget that saved my bacon later. Always check when CC&Rs were last updated. These had been filed 6 months ago, right after Carol moved in. The previous version had no restrictions on food trucks or home-based businesses. I'll need you to remove the vehicle within 14 days, she said, and cease all cooking operations immediately. That's when I knew this wasn't about neighborhood peace. This was personal. After she left, I started paying attention. Real attention. Carol's house was 3 streets over with a 3-car garage that was always closed. She got visitors at odd hours, never the same car twice, always business meetings that lasted exactly 20 minutes. Her trash cans were always empty on pickup day, like she either didn't generate garbage or disposed of it somewhere else. The first wave of harassment started exactly 14 days later. I woke up to find an official-looking notice taped to my truck. Violation of Municipal Code. 2347B, Commercial Vehicle in Residential Zone. Fine, $250 per day until corrected. Here's the thing about Phoenix municipal codes. They're written by people who've never run a small business in their lives. Technically, any vehicle over a certain weight with commercial signage could be considered a violation, but the city rarely enforced it unless someone filed a formal complaint. Guess who filed that complaint? I called the city office, spoke to a tired-sounding clerk who admitted they'd received multiple concerned citizen reports about my truck. When I asked for specifics, she couldn't provide any, just paperwork processed according to procedure. $250 a day was more than I made on slow days. If this stuck, I'd be bankrupt within a month. But Carol wasn't done. Day 3 of the fines, I arrived at my usual Wednesday spot downtown to find 3 customers from last week standing around looking confused. Apparently, they'd all received anonymous Facebook messages claiming that Abuela's Kitchen had been shut down for health code violations, and that several people had gotten food poisoning. Complete lies, of course. My health department rating was an A+, and I'd never had a single complaint. But by the time I'd set up and started cooking, half my regular lunch crowd had disappeared. Day 5, I got a visit from an actual health inspector. Someone had filed a formal complaint about unsanitary conditions, possible rat infestation, and unsafe food storage. The inspector spent 2 hours going through everything with a microscope, clearly expecting to find violations. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Whoever called this in either has you confused with someone else, or they're trying to cause you trouble, he told me as he signed off on another perfect inspection. Your operation is cleaner than most restaurants I visit. Day 8, things got ugly. I was prepping for the morning rush when my phone started blowing up. Screenshots from neighborhood social media groups, all posted from anonymous accounts. Photos of my truck with captions like drug dealing operation disguised as food truck and criminals targeting our children with free samples. The posts were professionally written, designed to hit every possible fear button. Immigration status, drug dealing, child safety, gang activity, all complete fabrication, but shared dozens of times before I even knew they existed. That afternoon, I found my truck's tires slashed. The police took a report, but what were they going to do? No witnesses, no security cameras in the area, could have been anyone. The officer suggested I might want to consider parking in a more appropriate location. That night, I called my parents. My dad listened to the whole story without interrupting, the way he always did when I was a kid and some bigger kid was pushing me around at school. "Mijo," he said finally, "this isn't about a food truck. Someone's scared of what you represent." "What do I represent? Tacos?" "Success, independence, community. Someone sees what you've built and it threatens something they're trying to hide." My dad was a mechanic for 30 years before he retired. He understood how people tried to use the system to protect their own interests. "Find out what she's hiding," he said. "People who attack others are usually defending something." That's when I started really watching Carol's operation. The breakthrough came from Miguel Santos, a transmission specialist who'd been buying lunch for me twice a week since I started. Miguel was the kind of guy who noticed things. Comes with the territory when you spend your days figuring out why machines don't work the way they're supposed to. "Danny, can I ask you something?" Miguel said one Thursday, leaning against my service window. "You know that lady who's been giving you trouble?" "Carol, yeah, what about her?" "She drives a lot of different cars, right? Always temporary plates?" I nodded. "Those aren't dealer demos," Miguel said quietly. "I work on cars for half the dealers in Phoenix. Those temporary plates she's using, they're the wrong color for this year, and the numbering system's off. Here's something most people don't know about temporary license plates. They're not just random numbers. Each state has specific formats, colors, and security features that change regularly to prevent fraud." Miguel had been looking at Carol's cars with professional eyes, and something wasn't adding up. "There's more," Miguel continued. "I got a buddy who works impound. Says there's been a bunch of high-end cars reported stolen lately, all BMWs and Mercedes, VIN numbers filed off, professional job." The pieces started clicking together. "You think she's involved?" "I think someone who drives a different stolen car every week and harasses honest business owners might be worth watching more carefully." That weekend, I started what I called community research. Wasn't hard. Food truck operators have the best intelligence network in any city. We know which corners are good for business, which cops are cool, which city inspectors are honest, and which neighborhoods have problems. I reached out to other truck operators, asked if they'd had trouble with HOAs or seen anything weird in my area. Carlos, who ran a taco truck in Scottsdale, had an interesting story. About 3 months ago, this lady in a BMW tried to get me shut down, said I was bringing undesirable elements to the neighborhood. White lady, mid-40s, always talking on her phone? Carol Fitzgerald? Never got her name, but yeah, probably. Thing is, she showed up in a different car every time we talked. Always BMWs, always temporary plates. My cousin works for Border Patrol, says that's a classic smuggling pattern. Rosa, who operated a breakfast truck downtown, had seen Carol's cars parked in weird places. Industrial area, late at night, always meeting with people, quick conversations, then they drive away. Looked like business, but not normal business. I spent the next 2 weeks building a map of Carol's activities, where she went, when she went there, what cars she drove. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Carol Fitzgerald was running a sophisticated car theft and laundering operation. Steal high-end BMWs and Mercedes, transport them to a chop shop in the industrial district, swap VIN numbers with salvaged vehicles, create fake titles, then sell them through private party sales or export them to Mexico. Here's the knowledge nugget that made everything click. Arizona sits right on a major smuggling corridor, and luxury car theft is a billion-dollar business. The cars get stolen in Phoenix, Scottsdale, or Tucson, then either sold locally with fake paperwork or driven across the border where they're worth 3 times their U.S. value. Carol's operation was probably moving 15 to 20 cars a month, which meant she was clearing somewhere between $2 and $3 million annually. No wonder she could afford to pay cash for a house in Sunset Hills. But here's what she didn't count on. My food truck brought attention to the neighborhood. Construction workers, delivery drivers, police officers on patrol, all the people who notice when something doesn't look right. That's why she wanted me gone. It wasn't about noise or smells or property values. It was about keeping law enforcement and observant people away from her area of operations. Time for Phase 2. I started documenting everything. Every car Carol drove, every meeting she had, every pattern I could identify. I enlisted my customer network, construction workers who were on job sites all over the valley, delivery drivers who knew every street in Phoenix, mechanics who could spot a stolen car from 3 blocks away. Maria Gonzalez, who cleaned offices downtown, had seen Carol's cars parked at a warehouse complex off Indian School Road. Always at night, always quick visits. Sometimes there'd be 3 or 4 cars there, then by morning they'd be gone. Tony, an electrician who'd been buying breakfast burritos from me for months, had done work at that same warehouse complex. Weird setup inside. Looked like a body shop, but no signage. Guys working there didn't speak much English, paid everything in cash. Father Rodriguez at St. Augustine's had the most interesting information. Carol had approached him about donating a car to the church's charity auction. When he'd asked for paperwork, she'd suddenly changed her mind and driven away. Something didn't feel right, he told me. Woman offers to donate a $60,000 BMW, then gets nervous when I ask for a title? That's not normal charity behavior. Meanwhile, Carol was escalating her campaign against me. Week 3 brought anonymous calls to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, claiming I was in the country illegally and operating without proper documentation. ICE doesn't mess around with anonymous tips. They showed up at my house at 6 in the morning with a full tactical team. I'm a U.S. citizen, born in El Paso, with every document you could possibly want. But having federal agents search your house while your neighbors watch from their windows isn't exactly great for business relationships. The ICE agents were actually pretty cool about it once they realized they'd been sent on a wild goose chase. "Someone really doesn't like you," one of them said as they packed up their equipment. This complaint was detailed, specific, and completely false. That takes effort. Week 4 brought the racist graffiti. I found it one morning. "Illegals go home." Spray painted across Abuela's picture on the side of my truck. Someone had also poured sugar in my gas tank and slashed my awning. That was the moment I stopped playing defense and started playing offense. But first, I had to deal with the emotional impact, seeing my grandmother's photo defaced like that. It hit different than all the other harassment. This wasn't about business anymore. This was about family, heritage, and everything Abuela had worked for. I cleaned off the graffiti myself, carefully restoring her image. As I worked, neighbors started showing up. Mrs. Patterson brought coffee. The Hendersons offered to pay for professional cleaning. A family I'd never met brought their kids over to apologize for whoever did this awful thing. That's when I realized Carol had made a tactical error. By escalating to racist vandalism, she'd crossed a line that even sympathetic neighbors couldn't ignore. The community was starting to choose sides, and they weren't choosing hers. Time to bring her down. I reached out to Elena Vasquez, a reporter for La Voz, the Spanish-language newspaper that covered the Latino community in Phoenix. Elena had written about small business harassment before, and she was interested in the bigger picture. "If what you're telling me is true," she said, "this isn't just about one woman harassing one food truck. This is about organized crime using HOA power to protect illegal operations." Elena started her own investigation while I gathered the final pieces of evidence. The break came when Miguel introduced me to his cousin Roberto, who worked for a company that transported repossessed vehicles. Roberto had been hired to move cars from Carol's warehouse complex on 3 separate occasions, always paid in cash, always told to ask no questions. The weird thing was, those cars were supposed to be repossessions, but they all had new VIN plates, Roberto said. Fresh welding marks, different serial numbers on the engines. That's not normal repo work. Roberto had photos on his phone from the transport jobs, clear images of Carol's operation, the warehouse setup, and most importantly, VIN numbers that could be traced. That's when I made the call that would end everything. My Uncle Eddie works for the FBI in El Paso, Financial Crimes Division. He'd been tracking cross-border vehicle theft for 15 years, and when I described Carol's operation, he got very interested very quickly. "Danny, what you're describing sounds like a major smuggling operation. The timing, the volume, the methods. This could be connected to cases we've been working on for months." Federal law enforcement had been tracking a spike in luxury vehicle thefts across Arizona, but they hadn't been able to identify the local organizing operation. My documentation provided the missing pieces. "We're going to need you to keep doing what you're doing for a few more weeks," Eddie said. "Document everything, but don't change your routine. We need to build a solid case before we move." Meanwhile, I had one more card to play. Cinco de Mayo was coming up, and I'd been planning a neighborhood festival for months. Food trucks, mariachi music, traditional dancing, face painting for kids. The works. I'd gotten permits from the city, approval from the fire department, and enthusiastic support from local businesses. Carol had tried to block it through the HOA, claiming it would cause traffic problems and disturb the peace. But since it was happening on public streets with proper permits, there wasn't much the HOA could do legally. What she could do was escalate her harassment campaign one final time. 3 days before the festival, I found a dead rat in my truck's fresh water tank. Someone had broken in during the night, bypassed the locks, and contaminated my entire water system. It would take 2 days and $3,000 to completely sanitize and replace everything. The message was clear: cancel the festival or face health department shutdown. But Carol had finally made the mistake I'd been waiting for. The break-in was captured on Mrs. Patterson's new security camera, installed after my truck had been vandalized. Clear footage of Carol and 2 men forcing entry into my truck at 3 in the morning. Better yet, one of the men was driving a silver BMW that Roberto had seen at the warehouse complex. I called Elena, Miguel, Father Rodriguez, and my Uncle Eddie. It's time. She just handed us everything we need. Festival day arrived with perfect weather and a surprise Carol wasn't expecting. By 10 in the morning, Sunset Hills was transformed. 5 food trucks lined the street, mariachi music filled the air, and families from all over Phoenix had come to celebrate. Local TV news had shown up to cover the community success story. Carol tried one last desperate move. She called the police, claiming the festival was an unpermitted gathering that violated noise ordinances. The police showed up, talked to the event coordinator, me, checked the permits, all legitimate, and stayed for lunch. Officer Martinez, who'd been buying breakfast from me for months, ordered 3 carne asada burritos for his patrol unit. "Food's too good to shut down," he told the news reporter with a grin. That's when Elena dropped her bombshell. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, while the festival was at its peak and news cameras were rolling, Elena published her investigative piece online. HOA secretary operated multi-million-dollar car theft ring. The article detailed Carol's entire operation, complete with photos, documented evidence, and quotes from federal law enforcement sources. LaVose had coordinated with local English-language media, so the story hit simultaneously across multiple outlets. But the real fireworks started when the FBI showed up. 3 black SUVs rolled into the festival area at 2:30, followed by Phoenix PD, Arizona Department of Public Safety, and ICE investigators. Not there for immigration issues this time. They were part of the federal task force targeting vehicle smuggling operations. Carol was at home, probably watching news coverage of the festival and planning her next move, when 20 federal agents surrounded her house. I found out later that the raid recovered 14 stolen vehicles, computers full of fake documentation, over $400,000 in cash, and evidence linking her operation to similar schemes in Texas, California, and New Mexico. The arrest was broadcast live on 3 local news stations. There's a special satisfaction in watching your tormentor get handcuffed on live television while surrounded by federal agents. Carol went from HOA secretary to federal defendant in about 30 seconds. But the best part? The news cameras caught me serving tacos to FBI agents while their colleagues searched Carol's house in the background. This is exactly why America works, Agent Sarah Chen told the reporter while holding a carnitas taco. Honest small business owners helping law enforcement take down organized crime. Plus, these are the best tacos in Phoenix. The festival continued until evening, with an estimated 3,000 people celebrating community, culture, and the fact that justice sometimes actually wins. The legal aftermath was swift and brutal for Carol. Federal prosecutors charged her with racketeering, vehicle theft, money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The investigation revealed connections to organized crime groups in 3 countries, with evidence of over $15 million in stolen vehicle sales over 2 years. She tried to plea bargain, claiming she was just a small player in someone else's operation. Didn't work. The evidence showed she'd been the Arizona organizer for one of the Southwest's largest vehicle smuggling rings. 22 years in federal prison, full asset forfeiture, and a restitution order that would keep her paying victims for the rest of her life. The HOA dissolved itself rather than face liability lawsuits from homeowners who discovered their secretary had been running a criminal enterprise from their neighborhood. As for me, the festival became an annual tradition. 3 local restaurants offered to buy my recipes. Phoenix Magazine named Abuela's Kitchen Best Food Truck 2023. The city council passed a resolution supporting small business entrepreneurs. And 6 months later, I opened Abuela's restaurant on Central Avenue with a full kitchen, space for 30 tables, and my grandmother's picture in a place of honor above the entrance. Miguel's transmission shop is next door. Elena got a journalism award for her investigative series. Father Rodriguez blessed the restaurant on opening day. Mrs. Patterson comes in every Tuesday for lunch. The best part? I kept the food truck. It's parked right in front of the restaurant, fully operational, ready for catering jobs and special events. Carol thought she could use the system to destroy someone who threatened her criminal operation. Instead, she discovered that communities are stronger than corruption, and sometimes the little guy has more powerful friends than the criminals realize. The moral of the story isn't complicated. When someone tries to destroy your American dream, make sure they understand exactly whose dream they're messing with. Next week, I'm going to tell you about the time a property developer tried to use eminent domain to steal a veteran's family farm, and how that veteran used his military training to expose the corruption and save not just his land, but an entire town's water supply. Until then, keep fighting the good fight, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is serving justice with a side of perfect carnitas. Viva la comunidad!